What's going on, guys? This is Seth Hupel here um, from NRM, 2307, and the wildlife species that I've chosen for my project is Attwater's prairie chicken, or Tympanuchus cupido attwateri. So, the significance of this species: it's a subspecies of the vulnerable greater prairie chicken, or Tympanuchus cupido. It is native to the coastal prairies of Texas and Louisiana. And you may be wondering why I chose this species. Well, as a native Texan, I felt that it was only right. Um, for a while now, this species has been only found in Texas, and mainly in one location. It is, um, it was found in Louisiana at one time, maybe a long time ago, probably back in the late. Last time it was probably in Louisiana. It was probably the late 1930s or 40s, back when there was at least a little bit of a somewhat resemblance of a stable population. As someone who has studied Texas wildlife management and has done a little bit himself with Texas Parks and Wildlife for, that was a couple of years ago. But I've been studying it for a few years. I felt it was only right to, cover a now native Texan. So there are a few differences between the two species. The Attwater's prairie chicken, you may not be able to tell quite as much with the lighting. It's a little bit different between the two photos. But the Attwater's prairie chicken, the main difference is a little bit smaller. It's a little bit smaller of an animal on average. It's also a little bit lighter color. So the greater prairie chicken has, as you can see, the darker stripes on the feathers are a little more black, and on the Attwater's prairie chicken, it is a little more chestnut brown. Also, the air sacs that the males use for mating kind of produces a thrum. Gets the attention of the hens around the area. It is a little bit more golden color than the greater prairie chicken, which is more of like a citrus orange. So the genetic decline for this population kind of goes hand in hand with the urbanization of southeastern and South Texas. Started around the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and like I said, mainly due to the urban land development of coastal prairies. People started moving into Texas, that area, more and more. The greater Houston area, Kingsville, Corpus Christi, those places, and to support this huge economic boom, this economic growth, agriculture as well had to move into the surrounding areas. So they, plowed up all of these coastal prairies and planted crop fields, such as, rice is a big one in that area. Corn, sorghum, wheat, all those things. Also the Houston, as everyone knows, has exploded in the past 40, 50 years, if not more. So that's a big area as well. By 1937, populations declined to just 8,700 individuals. That's when everyone was kind of like, oh, hey, we kind of got an issue here. And then continued to trend down to 158 wild chickens in 1994. Later in the PowerPoint, as of February, this is stated later in the PowerPoint, but as of February 2021, the population has reached an astronomically low 40 wild birds. So it's a pretty big issue. To get more into detail on land development, like I said earlier, conversion of native habitat to crop fields and cattle pastures. With these bringing invasive species for these cattle pastures, such as coastal grass and Bermuda grass and all those, which are sod-forming grasses, which really are very bad for genetic diversity, as well as the expansion of urban cities, overgrazing of coastal or of native grasses, which leads to the the native grass. No, I'm sorry, not the native grasses. The invasive grasses to overtake them and form this huge sod that you see in that area of the world. Also, with more people comes less wildfires, which also decreases genetic diversity among the native flora. and the encroachment of the honey mesquite and all those, it's really not great for the local wildlife. Well, for the greater prairie chicken mainly. Here's a little bit of an example of the development of Houston. As you can see on the left is around the 1950s. It's a decently small area. You can actually compare it here. So let me see if I can't draw it on the map for you. So here's my little pointer. So this area right here, as you can see, is like right in this area on the map. So it's actually, it's definitely exploded, as well as, areas over here with the Beaumont and all those areas have gotten big as well. And not to mention Corpus Christi, Kingsville, and then the valley areas has gotten very, very large as well. So population fragmentation. Populations became isolated due to loss of habitat, obviously. This leads to a decline in genetic variation, your genetic drift. These with less individuals than in a population, in a local population, then the genes are going to drift to one side, or not drift to one side. I'm sorry. They're going to become very, very small. Genetic diversity is going to be very, very small with inbreeding and all that stuff, and that leads into a genetic bottleneck and then a loss of heterozygosity, which is very bad for any sort of population anywhere in the world. You got to maintain that genetic variation to maintain a healthy population. And because these populations were lost to each other, they couldn't make any contact. These issues started to happen. It was a divide and conquer kind of thing. They just all kind of died out. So some management practices that are currently being used. The big one is obviously going to be Attwater's Prairie Chicken National Wildlife Refuge in Eagle Lake, Texas. Land was bought in 1965, and the refuge, established in 1972. Back when they were like, okay, we're kind of in emergency mode now. We need to set up some sort of refuge for these animals. They do raise pinbirds there, as well as manage the local prairie habitat to suit the chickens. While the pinbirds do not count currently, I believe, like I said earlier, the number is about 40 wild animals on this wildlife refuge. An awesome management practice that I found that seemed to work for the APC, or Attwater's Prairie Chicken, is a cyclic mix of prescribed burns and grazing. So 2 of the 5 tools of Leopold's wildlife management. The plow, or I'm sorry, the fire and the ox. Provides better canopy cover than the traditional burn only method for these. The canopy cover is lower, which suits the APC's chicks better. Allows them a little more room to move around. They get less suffocated, all that stuff. Flora diversity increased by 5%, and an increased amount of bare ground post fire, which is good for the males or the roosters when they're mating. So the current statuses and effects. The current range of the APC, or Attwater's Prairie Chicken, is 12,000 acres, or 0.2% of the original 6 million acres it used to inhabit. The current population estimated is about 40 wild birds, and these are going to be located on the Attwater's Prairie Chicken National Wildlife Refuge. Genetic variation may be too low for population to fully recover. 40 wild birds, there's really not much you can do. You can do your best, but that's it's pretty low genetic variation. It's been done before. With the seals on the west coast, they were got down to 20 wild. A population of 20. But it's going to, if they can successfully recover these animals, it's going to leave scars on their genetic variation. So we will see in the future, these birds are a little bit less resilient than the I can't remember that population name. Those seals on the west coast. The current surviving individual's fitness is actually attributed to individual genes in each individual bird, not necessarily heterozygosity. So some of these birds got a good role, got pretty lucky with their alleles that they inherited, and it's still not a very diverse population as far as genetic variation goes. So, and okay, so here is the Attwater Prairie Chicken National Wildlife Refuge for reference. As you can see, here's the one on the left here is in reference to Texas. So here's Austin, San Antonio, etc. We're way up here. And then on the right, you can see it zoomed in. This is the whole area. So it's pretty small. There's not a whole lot there, which is sad. But it's the cards that we're dealt. Not much we can do about it now except keep pushing forward and try to save as many of these birds as we can. Analysis and conclusion. So first thing struck out to me was empiric herbivory. Obviously, it's a cool idea. It seems to work, but it might be too little too late. I hate to pull the, it ain't over till it's over. But hate to pull that kind of card and say it might be too little too late, but it's going to be hard. That study for empiric herbivory was conducted in 2016. It'll include it in my works cited page. You can take a look at it if you'd like. Another issue was there's really not a whole lot of public outreach for this species. An A&M professor wrote, partnered with Texas Parks and Wildlife and wrote an Attwater's Prairie Chicken Recovery Plan in 1993. It's actually a guy I've met before. He's probably heard of him before. His name is Dr. Nova Silvi. Super great guy. But actually, if you look at the article, which is also included in my works cited page, if you go back and look at the article, the second bullet, I believe, is to increase public outreach for this kind of animal. Let the public be aware. Hey, this is a real issue that's going on in your home state. And honestly, as from someone who has also lives in the state, I think this part has failed. There hasn't been, Texas Parks and Wildlife, in my opinion, has not done a great job of, bringing awareness to this critically endangered species. And, obviously it's suffered for it because there are the lowest the population's ever been. Also a big deal is there were never really any incentives for landowners to preserve natural habitat that I could find. Spent about 30 minutes on the web trying to look for, tax breaks for Attwater's prairie chicken. There's always going to be that wildlife tax break, which I guess that could work. But, if they provide an additional one for the prairie chicken, I think it would go a long way. Especially for landowners who are, trying to raise cattle. These people are just trying to make a living. I understand. I get it. Someone who's also in ag. We're all ag majors. But, if you provide these government assistances for this, certain species, I think it would have helped and gone a long way as far as, helping this population recover. So, yeah. Thank you guys for listening. Appreciate you guys. Hope you all have a good rest of your day.